Who was the historic Jesus? What was he like? What was his life really like? Such questions have intrigued countless people over the centuries, and based on your personal belief, your political aspirations and agendas, all kinds of theories have taken flight. The question of historical authenticity was pretty much settled in the early 20th century by scholars. Those in the field today agreed that a Jewish man called Jesus of Nazareth did exist in the Herodian kingdom of Judea during the 1st century CE, and that it was his teachings that provided the foundation upon which Christianity was constructed. Scholars differ about the beliefs and teachings of Jesus as well as the accuracy of biblical accounts, with only 2 events being supported by nearly universal scholarly consensus, and that was that Jesus was baptized and that Jesus was crucified. But we're not here today to try to make a case for the truthfulness of Bible stories or to try to decide if Jesus was a supernatural being equal to God or a man who was a profound teacher. Rather, the exploration for today is to think about how the teachings that are attributed to Jesus impacted his life 2,000 years ago, and to imagine what they mean to us today. So the following that I'm going to share is from a website called He Gets Us. Listening to the world around us, we couldn't help but come to the conclusion that the volume is rising day by day. If you listen to the news, you hear louder voices, stronger opinions, and harsher disagreements. If you scroll through your social feeds, you see arguments in the comments section of the most benign posts. Everyone wants to be heard, and collectively, we seem to be going to greater and greater lengths to be the one voice loud enough to be made out above the din. But as we listened, we noticed that most of what gets amplified, most of the stuff loud enough to be heard, is rife with hate, anger, and discontentment. And when hate gets amplified too often, we try to drown it out with even louder hate from a different perspective. It's a vicious cycle, and it's one that Jesus dealt with over 2,000 years ago. Everywhere he went, he was met with dissenting opinions, trap questions, and directed hatred. People were constantly trying to silence him, discredit him, or hijack his platform to amplify their own voices. It must have been infuriating, but he didn't give in and add to that noise. Jesus used his voice, but he didn't shout, mostly. He only stayed on the path of preaching patience, selflessness, and love. But more importantly, he also demonstrated those values. He responded to the ever-increasing volume of hate and with quiet and deliberate acts of love. And the result is evident in the fact that we're still talking about his teachings over 2,000 years later. And ultimately, what he taught was that love was louder, and it still is. Whatever lack of faith one claims, what remains for each person to work out for themselves is to construct a code to live by. Some of us have taken to heart the teachings they received as children and found that those teachings have served them well in living a life that reflected their values. Others of us have had a more complicated relationship with the things we were taught and have had to do a good bit of examination of those teachings to separate the wheat from the chaff. For good or ill, what we were taught has impacted our lives in countless ways. And I think that you probably all have done this, but if you have not taken time to think deeply about how the teachings of your youth are impacting your life today, I invite you to do that. And as a companion exploration, I also invite you to think deeply about what your words and actions may be teaching to those around you today. A few of the teachings of Jesus were shared during the Blue Note this morning. In the end, a review of all of the things attributed to Jesus boiled down to caring for those on the margins, loving others even when it seems impossible to do so, and to remember our connection to the mystery that is much greater than things that we can really understand. A colleague of mine, Rebecca Edmondson Lang, reflects on the claim that says that Jesus was the light of the world. She says, "Some people say that Jesus is the light of the world. We can all be the light of the world if we seek to act in ways that enlarge the realms of love and justice. When we share another's pain or offer a comforting ear to a friend in need, we are the light of the world. When we give bread to the hungry or support ways to house the homeless, we are then the light of the world. When we fight temptations to wrongdoing within ourselves and treat our neighbors with respect, we become the light of the world. When we try to overcome differences with understanding and solve conflict with peaceful means, we are then the light of the world. When we look for the good in other people and in ourselves, we become the light of the world. When we do not stay quiet in the face of prejudice, but speak our minds firmly and gently, we are then the light of the world. When we fight despair within ourselves and side with hope, we become the light of the world. When we use our powers justly and in the service of love for humanity, friends, that is when we are the light of the world." Our opening song, "We Shall Be Known," reminds us that we shall be known by the company we keep. The company we keep are those who help us to reinforce the teachings we live by, the teachings that we end up sharing with others. And this is really the underlying reason why Unitarian Universalism speaks to me. While there are conflict and differences of thought that exist within this faith, the principles and values to which we aspire articulate the things that I want to live my life by, the things that I hope my words and actions are teaching others. And it's with people like Pastor Jim Palmer that I wish to keep company. I've never met this person, but I found his words to be inspiring to me. There was a post that was making rounds and on social media recently, and they sum up most of what I think of the value to me today of what Jesus taught all those years ago. He says, "It's unfortunate for all those years as a pastor that I cheapened Jesus by making him into a supernatural being who would save the world, and not as a courageous and revolutionary human person who came to love it. I can't relate to the religious Jesus as a sinless saint, but I feel like I understand the Jesus who found deep peace within himself, but could also become unhinged by the abuses of religion. With that in mind, here are some things about Christianity that I believe Jesus would not endorse if he had a say. I don't think Jesus would agree with the fact that his vision for a transformed society got twisted into an afterlife fantasy about heaven, or that a religion was formed to worship his name instead of a movement to advance his message. I don't believe that Jesus would agree that the gospel says his death solved the problem of humankind's separation from God, instead of accepting that his life revealed the truth that there is no separation. I believe that Jesus would not agree with the religion bearing his name being conceived by the theories and doctrines of Paul instead of the truth Jesus lived and demonstrated, or that he was said to exclusively be God in the flesh, putting his example out of reach, rather than teaching that we all share in the same spirit that empowered his character and life. Or perhaps that the religion that claims his name teaches that his wisdom and teachings are the only legitimate way to know truth in God. I don't think Jesus would agree with the idea that humankind stands condemned before God and deserving of divine wrath and eternal conscious judgment, requiring the death of Jesus to fix it. I don't think Jesus would agree with the idea, the notion that people are waiting on Jesus to return to save the world and end suffering, rather than to take responsibility for saving the world and solving suffering ourselves. Or that people think there is a magical potency in uttering the name of Jesus rather than accessing our own natural powers and capabilities to effect change. And lastly, that people have come to associate Jesus with church, theology, politics, and power, rather than courage, justice, humanity, beauty, and love. Friends, may you live a life that exemplifies teachings that lead to a greater sense of compassion, greater love, and greater service for all.